Hello and welcome to the Run Testers. My name's Nick, and in this video we're going to be comparing the Puma Velocity Nitro 3 and the Asics Novablast 4. Velocity Nitro and the Asics Novablast are both mid-level shoes in their company's range. I mean that in terms of both the amount of cushioning they have, which is extensive but not quite as considerable as some of the shoes in their range, although with the Novablast it is pretty much as cushioned as it gets, even for Asics. And also that in terms of price, so they both come in cheaper than the top cushion shoes in each company's range, things like the Puma Magnify Nitro 2 on Asics' side, things like the Gel Nimbus or even the Superblast if you're looking at that, and they're both meant to be daily trainers that can handle a variety of running but are also quite cushioned and comfortable. Velocity Nitro 3 is the cheaper shoe, it's £110 or $130. The Novablast 4 is £135 or $140. Novablast is the lighter shoe despite its very big stack height. It's 270 grams or 9.5 ounces in a UK 9. Velocity Nitro 3 is 283 grams or 10 ounces in the same size. You've got an 8mm drop on the Novablast 4, which stands 41.5mm high at the heel and 33.5mm high at the forefoot, whereas the Puma has a 10mm drop and it's 36mm at the heel, dropping to 26 at the forefoot. The Puma, you have a dual density midsole, with the top layer being Puma's Nitro foam, which is a nitrogen-infused TPEE material, and then you've got an EVA foam on the bottom, Pro Foam Light, which is a bit firmer, creates that dual density effect, where you've got the softer bouncer layer on top, sitting above a slightly more stable and firm EVA layer beneath. And you have a mesh upper with some power tape on the inside there, which adds a bit of structure and support to the upper all round. Fair bit of padding around the heel, not too much on the tongue though. Very long laces, I've noticed with this shoe. And then you've got a Puma Grip outsole, which is obviously a big strong point with Puma shoes in general. It's a very good outsole that grips really well in wet conditions and pretty durable as well. With the Asics, you've got a woven upper with a partially gusseted tongue. Again, you've got a fair bit of padding around the back of the shoe there. Pretty significant internal heel counter as well to try and create stability because of the higher stack height you have here. The stack is made up of Asics' Flight Foam Blast Plus Eco Foam, which is a fairly well balanced foam. It's used in a lot of Asics' shoes these days, and it's a nice mix of comfort and bounce and that kind of thing. It's not too unstable either, despite the high stack height here. You've also got sidewalls of that foam to create more stability with your foot sitting within those sidewalls. You have an AHA low rubber outsole with pretty extensive coverage, although I would say it's not quite as extensive as the Puma, especially on the forefoot of the shoe there, and not quite as grippy as well. It's a pretty decent outsole rubber this, but the Puma grip is an upgrade on the outsole on the Asics.
So fit for me has been very good overall in these two shoes. I've got them both in UK size 8. That's typically the running shoe size that I would go for. Now, what I would say with the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, I would say the nature of the upper that you're getting here in comparison to the Novablast 4, it definitely wraps a little bit closer, particularly at the midfoot. And I think when you go further back in this shoe, I think it does feel a little bit longer, but ultimately it's not an issue in terms of when I've been running in it. It just means you're getting a bit more space up front in the toes here, where I think with the Novablast 4, upper and the fit in general, it's a little bit more relaxed in terms of that fit. It definitely sits a little bit more snug around your feet, doesn't wrap as closely, I would say, compared to the Nitro 3. I do think it sits a little bit more snug in my UK size 8 here, but it absolutely been fine in terms of that feeling. The tongues are pretty similar on both of these shoes, so lacing and kind of tongue and general lockdown has been absolutely fine. Same level of padding, maybe getting a little bit more, a touch more on the Velocity Nitro 3, but I don't think there's a massive amount in it. So for me, I would go, true to size based on my testing. I do think the Velocity Nitro 3's fit and general upper sits a little bit closer and offers a little bit more room. But I think the upper and the fit of the Novablast 4 is a little bit more accommodating, hugs, and feels a little bit more snug in comparison to what the Puma shoe offers.
So the fit for me in both of these shoes, I'm a size 8 in the UK. I have both of these in a size 8 and they fit me absolutely perfectly. I have a fairly average width foot, so I have not had any issues with these. I know the Velocity Nitro 3 is probably a little bit more narrow than some shoes out there that sit into the same bracket, but it's fine. And I think the upper's quite forgiving as well, so it sort of gives you a bit of wiggle room. So I'd stick to my size in the Puma Velocity Nitro 3. Same goes for the Novablast. I think earlier versions of the Novablast were a little bit narrow, but the Novablast 4, it's got quite a nice stretchy upper on it. I've had no issues at all on it, and there's plenty of space, very comfortable. Loads of padding in both shoes as well. So I'd stay to my UK size 8 in both of these shoes.
So the fit's been good for me with both of these shoes in my normal running shoe size. I wear a UK 9 for both of these shoes, which is a US 10 with both brands. Got a nice amount of room with the toe box. I've got a good hold around the heel and midfoot as well. I've had no concerns at all. Puma is the more narrow shoe of the two, which suits me as I have a narrow foot. I've had no problems with it, but it is something to consider if you do have a wider foot, which I don't. So yeah, both have been really good for me in my normal size. So these are two shoes that I've really enjoyed testing this year and at the back end of last year in the case of the Asics. I think they are really good cushioned daily trainers that really can handle a nice wide variety of runs well, whilst being very comfortable and practical for just general use. I've obviously been a long time fan of the Velocity series and would have easily picked previous versions of the Velocity Nitro over previous versions of the Novablast, but I have really enjoyed the Novablast 4 more than the previous versions. I found it just have a slightly smoother, more enjoyable ride, which has made it, I think, just a better shoe for easy and faster runs alike. Both, like I say, are good versatile shoes. They're as cushioned as I'd ever want for a, an easy run shoe. I don't tend to go for huge maxed out stacks, although in the case of the Asics, you are getting a maxed out shoe here, but it is still quite nice and light. So I do think that makes it a really good option for people who maybe aren't really sold on big, heavy tanks for easy runs, which I don't tend to use, but you're getting that kind of level of cushioning and protection here, but in a lighter package that feels really nice for those relaxed runs. And the Puma, which, 36mm isn't a maxed out shoe by any means these days, but that is still very cushioned and it certainly feels very comfortable for easy paces. And then both of them are pretty versatile. So I've done sessions in both shoes. The Novablast actually was a bit of a surprise how well it coped with a decent session, running things like, I think it was like 60 seconds on, 30 seconds off, and then a cruise through a park run with some friends, and it felt good for that, and did a long run in the shoe. And again, the ride is very smooth, ticks over really nicely, works at a variety of pace as well. Puma, it's got a slightly more snappy ride because of the slightly higher drop and the setup of the shoe in general. It feels a fair bit nimbler and smaller on the foot. Even though the Asics is actually the lighter shoe, it feels very nimble, the Puma, because it's a lot narrower, and that does help with how it feels when you are going to pick up the pace for short bursts. And it's got enough kind of cushioning and bounce there to help you hold paces for longer stretches as well. Both of them are okay for certain workouts and certain tempo runs. Like, they wouldn't be shoes that I'd feel brilliant about going and doing an all-out workout in, when I'd probably use something like a super trainer or even a racing flat or a carbon shoe or something like that. But they can handle a really nice mix of runs really well, and they've certainly got the comfort at the easy end of things. When I was running in both shoes at the same time, it was quite noticeable actually the slightly different feel you have here, because the Puma is that narrower, higher drop, bit more of a snap through to it. It still feels good, and it's not a harsh shoe. So even with the 10mm drop here, it's not really aggressive snap through that I get with some shoes that gives me a bit of forefoot discomfort. I think the way the foams are set up on the Puma means that you move through fairly smoothly with that drop, so it doesn't feel necessarily perhaps quite as high as 10, but it does feel higher than the Asics, which is a more rockered shoe, and you feel a slightly smoother ride when you are going along in it. It's got a lot of stuff going on at the heel, but unlike with past Novablast, I didn't really find that intrusive. I found that the rocker really worked a bit better with the shoe than the past ones, which did mean I just rolled through quite nicely with it, rather than hitting this big chunk at the back and not really getting a smooth ride out of it. So yeah, they are slightly different rides. You have got the more rockered feel on the Asics, the cushier feel, the slightly softer feel, but the Puma still feels good in terms of softness and cushioning, and then has that slightly more snappy transition. You feel the ground a bit more, you get a bit more kind of ground contact and directness from it. And other thing to mention on the run test is the Puma outsole is a major plus. Like, the Asics one has been fine. I've used it in some greasy conditions and you just slip a little bit, it's not too big a problem. But the Puma grip outsole is just fantastic for winter runs in wet conditions. It just grips really well, whatever kind of pace you're going to be running at, and it just is a big plus point for Puma shoes like this that are going to be used day in, day out. It's just a very practical shoe, and that's something I say the Asics isn't quite as good at on practicality, not only because I've got the shrimp colourway with the light pink on the front there, but it's got an outsole that's okay, but the Puma's got a really outstanding one.
So in terms of my running experience with these two shoes, I would definitely class these as two standout versatile daily trainers. And the types of daily trainer shoes that I would like to use, shoes that you can run slower, longer in, but if you want to go and pick up the pace a little bit in there, do some more up-tempo stuff, then these shoes are absolutely capable of doing that. Now, what I would say is there are some slight differences in terms of the experience that I've had running in these shoes. And I think, it just means that they work a little bit better in certain scenarios compared to the other shoe. I think for me, the Novablast 4 is absolutely a shoe that you can go and run long and slow in, but I do think there's a bit more of a kind of faster edge in terms of the feeling in this shoe. I think, it's not super bouncy or as bouncy as the Velocity Nitro 3. I don't think there's a massive amount in it, but I think ultimately there's just a little bit more of an emphasis in running a little bit quicker in the shoe. It just wants you to run a little bit faster in this shoe. Now, you're not doing particularly speed work and stuff like that, but when I have run a bit quicker, I have found the emphasis on getting you quickly onto your toes and a quite nice kind of stable fashion. It's something that I've experienced on the Novablast 4. Now with the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, I think the essence of this shoe is very similar to the previous two shoes. If you want to ease off and slow down, then you have a shoe to do that, and it definitely is more protective from that point of view compared to the other two shoes. I think maybe you've got a little bit more protection there compared to the Novablast 4. But if you want to pick up the pace, the way that midsole works, that kind of dual density midsole, giving you that, something that's, a little bit more life in it, a little bit more lively, and feels a little bit nicer to run, more up tempo in. You can absolutely do that in this shoe. And I do think there's some crossover, definitely is some crossover in terms of the types of runs that you're going to be able to do in these shoes. I just think there's a bit more of a faster edge, I think, on the Novablast 4. They're both very protective, I think, overall. I think they're both very stable in terms of that running experience. But ultimately, I think when I've run a little bit quicker, I felt like the Novablast 4 has wanted me to run a little bit quicker. I do think, if I think about the midsoles, I do find the Novablast 4 midsole a little bit softer compared to the Velocity Nitro 3, where I think that, as I said, I think the way the midsole works and the dual density kind of setup, it does offer a little bit more protection, I think, overall. So it's maybe slightly firmer, but it does soften up when you kind of engage in it in slightly quicker paces. When I look at the outsoles, I mean, for me, the Puma grip outsoles in general are fantastic, and you're definitely getting a lot more rubber here on the Puma shoe compared to the Novablast. Now, I found the outsole grip perfectly fine on both these shoes, but I think if I wanted something that potentially I could run slightly lighter trails and it won't get beaten up too much, and I think the Puma is going to offer a bit more on that front. General in terms of the weights, I think the weights, haven't been a major issue in terms of me, and obviously it has gone a little bit up in weight with the Puma compared to the Nitro 2, the same with the Novablast 4, but I think general the weights for the daily trainer profile that these shoes sit in, I think they've been absolutely fine. And yeah, they're not super light daily trainer shoes. They're not clunky or heavy shoes to run it in either. So from a weight point of view, I've been pretty happy on that front. So yeah, I think both, for me, two very good, versatile daily trainer shoes. One that I think maybe veers a little bit more on that kind of more tempo running, which I think is the Novablast 4, whereas the Velocity Nitro 3 can absolutely do that as well, but I think it's probably got a little bit more in its locker in terms of protection over those longer runs and just giving you a little bit more cushioning, as I said, to kind of cover you and feel like your legs are protected over those longer distance runs, which this shoe can absolutely do as well. I just think maybe you're getting a little bit more on that front for me based on my testing.
We've probably made it no secret on the channel that we're all quite big fans of the Velocity Nitro range. Some of us more than others. I have always enjoyed the Puma Velocity Nitro range. I think it's a solid daily shoe that has a little bit more to it. I think the main thing about the Velocity Nitro range for me is that it's just always been really, really good value. You're basically getting a shoe that can compete with other shoes that cost £40-50 more, and it's just as good. We put this into comparison videos before where it's gone up against things like the Fresh Foam 1080 range and shoes like that, where it's come out on top and it's significantly cheaper, or has been in the past. So I'm a big fan of the shoe. I think it's solid. I've used various versions for plenty of my daily sessions, things like that. I don't think it's a massively versatile shoe. I don't think it's a shoe that can do everything. But if you're a certain type of runner, and I think this is a shoe that really is a good choice if you're maybe new to running, you're a more general runner, or you're just a runner that just wants to go out and just get fit and you're not really bothered about times or anything like that. This is the sort of shoes to go for, because you're saving money but you're getting everything you want from the shoe. And there's probably no shoe that I've told my friends to get more than this shoe when they're looking for advice on getting their first running shoe or a new running shoe, just for those daily training runs. So it's solid. It's a solid shoe. It has a very comfortable midsole. It's not the softest midsole out there. Puma's foam, it tends to be a little bit more dense, but it does have a little bit of energy return in it, and all in all, it's just a really solid, enjoyable daily trainer that just ticks all of those boxes. It's not going to wow you. You're not going to run in it and think this is the bounciest, most exciting shoe in the world. It's just really reliable and comfortable, and you can use it for easy runs all the way up to almost faster efforts. I wouldn't probably train anything like tempo training or intervals in this shoe. I'd be all right doing it if I went out running in the shoe and I did an interval session. It'd be fine. It just doesn't have loads of speed in it. But I know lots of people that own one shoe, and they raced in this shoe. They've done half marathons in the shoe, and it's absolutely perfect. So yeah, just a great all-round good value shoe that really has impressed a lot of people, and everyone I know who's tried this shoe absolutely loves it, or the early versions. Now the Novablast range is a little bit different than the Velocity Nitro range, because the Velocity Nitro series has been pretty consistent from the off. There's not massive changes to this shoe over the 3 versions that we've had, but the Novablast has seen a lot of changes. The first version that came out was really bouncy, but it was also really wobbly. It had a lot of people didn't like it because it was unstable, and over time it sort of developed. The third version was a bit dull for me, didn't really enjoy it, wasn't a fan of that shoe. Novablast 4 is a nice step in a positive direction. I think the new midsole foam updates are really nice. It just feels like there's more energy return in this shoe now. It feels a bit more like a return to form for the Novablast 4. It's a really nice shoe to wear for easy runs. It's a great shoe for daily runs, and you can definitely go quite a bit faster than this. I've done intervals and I've done faster runs in the shoe, and for me it's probably got one of the widest spans of versatility from a daily shoe outside of things like the speed, but that does have a plate in it. So it's just a really comfortable, solid shoe that can do quite a lot. Really big fan of the Novablast 4. Think it's a great addition to the lineup, and I think it's definitely probably my second. I enjoyed the Novablast 1 the best, but it was really unstable. I really enjoyed the bounce in that shoe, the soft bouncy energy return in it. This is getting close to that, but it's a little bit more stable. It's a little bit. There's a little bit more to the build of the shoe, so it's probably more accessible to more people than that first one. But overall, it's just a solid, versatile shoe that I really enjoy using. Also, Asics has Superblast as well now, which is a fantastic shoe. I love that shoe. I use it for loads and loads of my marathon training runs. And it feels like Asics has learnt a lot from that shoe and added some of the elements to this shoe just to make sure that it is developing it in a way that is going in the right direction, as the Superblast is. So yeah, big fan of this shoe as well. Comparing these two shoes, I think it really comes down to the fact that I think the Novablast 4 is just a bit more versatile than the Velocity Nitro 3. They're both great daily shoes. They're both very good easy run shoes, but I would say Novablast 4 is better. That foam, there's just more to this foam for me. It's just a little bit more bouncy, a little bit softer. And also when you're running faster, you can just get more out of it. So I'd definitely say between these two shoes, this is probably the most versatile of both of them. But they're both solid shoes, and I'd probably say there's a bit more stability as well in the Puma Velocity 3. Outsole on both of them, so Puma Grip outsole is fantastic. It's one of the best outsoles out there at the moment and has been for a while. I would definitely say that I would have no issues running on lighter trails in this. Definitely fine on wet roads, all those sorts of things. So fantastic outsole. Novablast 4 outsole is fine. It's not one of the best outsoles out there, but it is. I've not had any issues with it at all. I know the Novablast 3, some people found that it was a little bit slippy when you're running on wet roads. I didn't find that, but I definitely haven't had a problem with this one at all. So I think it's absolutely fine. I just think the Puma Crate outsole is just better, and it is better than most running shoes out there. So my verdict on these two shoes, tricky one because I really like both of these shoes. They both sit very firmly at the front of my shoe cupboard, and I pick them up quite a bit. What I would say is that I think there's more to the Novablast 4. I think it's a bit bouncier. I think it's a bit more enjoyable to run in. I think it's a bit more versatile, and just has a little bit more in terms of performance for me. So the Puma Velocity Nitro 3, absolutely fantastic shoe. Really good value still, solid, stable, comfortable, just a great shoe that anybody can pick up, and it's just a good buy to have in your collection. But ultimately it just comes down to that versatility for me. But the Velocity range, quite often older versions become very, very cheap, and in fact I think the first Puma Velocity went down in price massively to like £50-60 very, very quickly, which made it just a ridiculously great value shoe when you're comparing it with other shoes out there, because it's as good as quite premium alternatives that are way more expensive than this shoe. So when it comes to price, and if you can pick up the Velocity Nitro 2 for a much cheaper price, I think my friend bought it for about £50 the other day, it is a better value option than the Novablast 4. There's not a lot in it, and especially if you're just looking for a great daily solid shoe at a great price, I'd go for Velocity Nitro 3. If they were the same price, I would go for the Novablast 4.
Okay, so my verdict on whether you should go for the Puma Velocity Nitro 3 or the Asics Novablast 4. Now, the first thing I'll say is that I have enjoyed running in both of these shoes. I think in terms of being daily trainer shoes that you can use for a mixture of different runs, mixture of different paces, I think these two very much sit or work or tick off those kind of key boxes in terms of that. Now, if we're looking at value, obviously the Puma Velocity Nitro 3 is cheaper. I think in terms of value, this is the shoe that you should be going for. If you have a budget for around £100, £110, you don't want to spend a little bit more than that, then this is a shoe that I would go for. I think in terms of where it excels, I think it excels in terms of, something that you can run up tempo in, something that gives you that kind of extra protection and extra level of cushioning to kind of run longer in it and make sure that your legs are well protected and covered on those longer runs. What I would say about the Novablast 4, I do think from a kind of fit point of view, it's a little bit more relaxed. And if you like that, and there's nothing wrong with that, I've absolutely enjoyed the fit of the Novablast 4, then I think that's where you're getting something slightly different. So something maybe geared to being a bit more comfortable in general in terms of that fit. But I do think there's a bit more of a faster, more tempo edge to it. And I have just found in my running time in it, I've wanted to run a little bit quicker in it, more so than kind of easing off in it. But it is a shoe that can do that. But it definitely is, and that's always going to be the Novablast kind of remit there, to be a daily trainer that you can run a little bit quicker in. So from that point of view, I think that is this shoe kind of works well from that point of view. But value for money, it's got to be the Velocity Nitro 3. But I think if you went for either of these shoes, I think they're going to serve you well in terms of being kind of almost do-it-all trainer shoes that you could potentially race in as well too, and give you a good level of protection over kind of longer runs and longer races. But also that kind of more up-tempo training as well. They'll work absolutely fine from that point of view. I would just be going for the Velocity Nitro 3 just because of the the price and where it sits. But ultimately, I've had a really good time running in the Novablast 4. I think a lot of people will feel well served for the same types of runs that the Puma shoe works for in the Novablast 4. I just think that maybe extra bit of money maybe gets you something a little bit more, polished, I think, in terms of the look. I think it's also something that feels a little bit nicer to run quicker in, but it isn't a massive amount in it overall for me. So yeah, Velocity Nitro 3 for me, I think if I had to pick between the two shoes, but ultimately I'd be happy running in both of these shoes for the same types of runs because I think they're both kind of standout options.
So verdict is this is a pretty close one for me, despite the fact of being such a long time fan of the Puma Velocity Nitro line. I think the Asics Novablast 4 is a really good shoe, and there are people who would just prefer the extra cushioning you get here and the slightly softer ride and the rocket feel to it. I think it will suit lots of people really well for easy runs in particular, and it is a really light shoe, even lighter than the Velocity, and that does give it that little bit of extra edge in terms of versatility as well. So it's a great shoe. We're very happy recommending the Novablast to lots of people. I think the Puma, I do just slightly prefer the ride feel. And normally I do prefer a rocket shoe, but it's just the way the foams are set up on this. They really do meld together nicely, and it doesn't feel like a harsh 10mm drop, really, rocking through hard. So I like the way it feels. I like the narrowness, the nimbleness of it. That really helps me just turn my legs over, and I really appreciate it in a shoe. And despite the fact it is heavier than the Novablast, doesn't really feel it on the foot. The advantage of the weight is the extra outsole you get here, which does make it a really practical shoe, and that is a big plus point for me in the moment doing marathon training in the winter here in the UK when it's nearly always wet patches somewhere on the pavement, and the fact it's a bit cheaper as well, especially in the UK, is no bad thing as well with the Velocity Nitro. So I think they're both really good shoes. I think if you do love maxed out cushion shoes and really are after that softer feeling that the Novablast does provide it, and that softness doesn't come out as a cost in terms of versatility, it is still a versatile shoe, but I slightly prefer the Velocity Nitro 3, and it'd be the one I'd go for out of the two.